In 1980, Eloy released Colours, a hidden gem that rivals some of the biggest names in progressive rock. Now, if you think you've heard it all with Pink Floyd or Genesis, then really, I ask you to think again. Now, when I came across the album Colours, this German band's 1980 release, I hadn't really heard of them before. But after diving into this album, it's clear why they deserve more recognition. Colours is a standout example of progressive rock done correctly. Now, from that very first track, the album demands your complete attention. Now, while many progressive rock albums of the era leaned heavily on the extended instrumental breaks and the overly complex structures, Colours manages to strike a balance between musicianship and accessibility. You're not just overwhelmed with endless solos or forced transitions. Instead, Eloy show you exactly how to fuse technical proficiency with melodies that just stick with you. The result is an album that's not just impressive, it's genuinely enjoyable from start to finish. Now, the sound in Colours has often been compared to that of Pink Floyd and Genesis, but what separates them is their ability to maintain a focus. Now, where Pink Floyd may meander and Genesis might lean heavily into elaborate storytelling, Eloy take a more straightforward approach without really sacrificing the complexity. Their composition are structured tightly, enough to keep your attention, but there's still enough room for experimentation. This makes the album an easy recommendation for anyone who might not usually gravitate towards the more perhaps abstract side of progressive rock. The opening track, Horizons, sets the tone with a spacey atmosphere which might remind you of Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here era. But it just doesn't stop there. As the track develops, you get a sense of urgency that builds towards a satisfying climax. The band's use of keyboards plays a big part in creating this atmosphere. But unlike other bands, Eloy keep things well grounded. The guitars are sharp, the drums are tight, and everything comes together with a feeling of not being overproduced. One thing that immediately stood out to me was how the lyrics don't try to be overly complicated. It's easy to get bogged down in pretentious themes or abstract concepts that leave you scratching your head. But Eloy don't fall into that trap. Instead, the lyrical themes in Colours remain broad but relatable, touching on ideas like exploration and human experience, never too dense or cryptic, making the album really accessible. A track like Illuminations, for argument's sake, illustrates this perfectly. The lyrics deal with themes of knowledge and enlightenment, but without the grandiosity that you might expect from a band like Yes or Rush. There's an underlying sense of optimism here that feels really refreshing, especially compared to the often darker themes in progressive music. But even though the lyrics are simple, they don't lack depth. There's just enough substance to provoke thought without feeling like the band is trying too hard. And when you listen to Colours, it's hard not to draw parallels to bands like Pink Floyd, Yes, or perhaps even Camel, like I've said. But they clearly share those same influences, but they also have their own distinct flavour. While Pink Floyd often embraced a more spaced-out atmospheric sound, Eloy focus on rhythm and pace. Now, you can hear this clearly on the track Child Migration, where the driving beat gives the song an energy that's really more focused than what you might get from Floyd. Comparing them to Genesis, you might find some similarities in the use of keyboards and complex arrangements, but Eloy steered clear of the overly theatrical elements that Genesis often embraced, particularly in their early years with Peter Gabriel. In that way, this band feel more grounded, keeping the focus on the music rather than trying to create that elaborate character or stories. You could also draw comparisons like Camel, especially in how Eloy balanced melody with instrumental skill. Like Camel, they tend to emphasize fluid guitar work and subtle keyboard arrangements rather than relying on bombastic soundscapes. Now, this makes the album a more inviting listen for those who might be overwhelmed by the complexities of other prog giants. Several tracks on Colours stand out, but if I had to pick the ones that really encapsulate the album's strength, I'd go with Child Migration and Silhouette. Now, the first one, Child Migration, starts off with a captivating bass line, and the song builds. You get this steady rhythmic flow that drives the track forward. It's one of those songs that keeps your attention not through flashy solos, but through its tight structure. The guitar work is precise, and the vocals are just strong enough to carry the melody without overpowering the instruments. Silhouette, on the other hand, offers a slightly different vibe, leaning more into the perhaps atmospheric side of things. I like this sort of sound. This time, the keyboards are a bit more pronounced, adding layers to the song that make it feel really expansive without drifting into self-indulgence. The track has a certain melancholic beauty to it, which gives the album some emotional weight that balances out the more upbeat moments. That's not to say that this album is a perfect album. There are some flaws, particularly when it comes to pacing. Some of the tracks feel like they're building towards something bigger, but don't quite get there. Giant, for example, feels like it starts off with a lot of potential, but loses momentum about halfway through. Now, while the musicianship is still top-notch, the song's structure doesn't quite hit the mark. And additionally, while the production on covers is mostly solid, it's not without its dated moments. The synth sounds, whilst generally well used, can occasionally come off as a bit cheesy by modern standards. That said, if you appreciate the aesthetic of late 70s and early 80s prog rock, this won't be much of an issue. It's strange that Eloy never really reached the heights of bands like Pink Floyd or Genesis, especially when you consider how well executed an album like Colours really is. Where some bands from the era became bogged down in excess, Eloy managed to refine their sound and create something that feels focused, energetic, and timeless. It's an album that I hadn't expected to impress me as much as it did, but it's clear that they have something special here. This album delivers. And next time on Fan Favourites, I'll be looking at one of Peter Gabriel's solo albums from that period where everything he did turned to gold. And in this video here, another fan favourite at The Cat Amongst the Pigeons back in the day.